Hello there, and thank you for coming to join us in the specs workshop. So today we will be training on specs. Throughout this training, please keep in mind that specs are a part of all methods of procurement, and this training will not cover any specific method of procurement. So let's get started. Here's the agenda for today, and we're going to use about an hour of your life, hopefully less, to cover it all. So hang in there. Procurement 101. General information on procurement is covered in the On-Demand Training Workshop, SPO 001 for Procurement Basics. Please make sure you take that Procurement Basics class. It has a lot of useful basic information for you to lock into your knowledge bank. On to specs. So what is a spec? The dictionary states that a spec is the act or process of specifying. Well, that's not very specific, right? So I looked up specifying and got to name or state explicitly or in detail. That's a little better, but we'll get to the exact HRS-defined description later. So who has the authority to prepare specs? The CPO does, and the CPO delegated the authority to prepare specs via Procurement Delegation 2010-01 dated December 6, 2010 to the Chief of Staff for both the Office of the Governor and the Lieutenant Governor, Executive Department Heads except DOE, HHSC, OHA, and UH, and to the State Librarian for Hawai'i State Public Library System. If you wanted to look it up, you can find the procurement delegation on the SPO website under the Manual for State and County Personnel. These are some of the definitions as defined by the Hawaii Administrative Rules, the HAR. You folks can read, so I'm not going to read it word for word. In a nutshell, practicable is accomplished or possible. Advantageous is the state's best interest. A sample provided by the rules on these two terms is the use of competitive sealed bidding may be practicable, that is, reasonably possible, but not necessarily advantageous, that is, in the state's best interest. Best value is the most advantageous offer, and standard commercial product is a product or material maintained in stock or readily available. The spec is basically the purchase description. It's the what, when, where, how, and possibly why to what you're buying. It provides minimum requirements to increase competition without being restrictive, so potential offers know what you're looking for. When creating specs, it's rarely necessary to create them from scratch. Chances are specs already exist, with perhaps a little modification. You just need to know where to find them. So here are some sources you can utilize. There's the request for information to gather, well, information. You can talk to manufacturers or pull their brochures, but be sure to compare multiple manufacturers so you're not being restrictive. Or you can even check with other departments, other jurisdictions, or even other states. So why is specs so important? Because they're critical to the procurement process. It lets the vendors clearly know what you need and what you don't need while providing a fair, competitive environment. Also, it allows for improved procurement practices through strategic sourcing. If you don't describe your minimum requirements, you could get something totally different. So right now, we're going to do a little exercise. I want you to imagine that you were given the assignment to procure for a hook. Now, picture that hook in your mind. You got it? So I can imagine you had a different kind of hook in your mind from everybody else. Some people may picture a ceiling hook, a fish hook, a crane hook, a plastic type hook, a wall hook, a boat hook, maybe even Captain Hook from Peter Pan. There are so many different types of hooks. Now, imagine you're a vendor responding to a solicitation for a hook. What would you offer to the state? Okay, so now we get it, right? We'll narrow it down. We want a fish hook. So we put fish hook. Yeah, we're good to go, right? Not really. How many types of fish hooks are there? I'm not a fisher person, but when Googled, apparently fish hooks differ in size, point, barbs, eyes. There's single, double, triple hooks, worm hooks, fly hooks, bait hooks. I never even knew there were so many different types of hooks. But anyway, the point of this exercise was to point out that without good specs, vendors can formulate what vendors can formulate their own idea of what you need. And when they do that, you may end up getting and paying for something you just can't use. So if you're ever procuring for hooks or for anything you procure, a well-written spec is a must. Here is the HRS definition of a spec. In a very basic nutshell, a spec is a physical or functional description of the supply or service you require. A scope or statement of work is a description of the requirements to be performed. Scopes or statements of work are more commonly used when procuring for services. There are 5 different types of specs, but I listed the combo as a type of spec since it's actually the most commonly used. We'll start off with design specs. Design specs state the physical requirements or characteristics of an item. They're used when you know what you want and can develop the procedures or processes that should be followed. Design specs usually use standard measurements like length, weight, size, and includes characteristics like what the product is made out of, brass, chrome, steel, plastic, that kind of stuff. All specs have advantages. With design specs, you'll basically get what you spec'd out, nothing less, nothing more. But with all their advantages, design specs also have disadvantages. It can limit competition and create obsolescence and restrictiveness. It can create higher prices if the product has to be custom made or if the product is over-specified. And it can increase liability and put responsibility of the final product on the person who wrote up the specs. For example, if a buyer is buying paint and details the exact chemical specs of the paint desired, when they get the paint and paint the wall and a month later the paint fades and chips, whose responsibility is it? It's the buyers. They're the ones who specified the exact chemical structure that they wanted. Performance specs spec out what results are required instead of how the work is to be performed. They basically describe what the item is required to do. The advantages of performance specs is that it is very result outcome driven and it can offers the flexibility in what they offer. For example, copiers. You, the buyer, specifies the output volumes and quality standards. The offerers, in turn, can offer a product that meets your minimum output and quality standards, or they can beef it up and offer a product that meets and exceeds your requirements. So if the offerer does this, it's a chance they have to take since it may increase their offered price. There are negatives to performance specs. They can be time-consuming, long, lengthy, and super detailed. And if the specs are not developed correctly, you can end up with, well, junk. Restrictive specs are specs written specific to a brand name item and does not allow for an or equal. Restrictive specs require CPO approval for all methods of procurement except small purchases. When requesting for restrictive specs, you'll need to justify why only that identified brand will satisfy the state's needs and why it is not practicable to use a less restrictive spec. Restrictive specs limit competition and provide no incentive for vendors to offer their best price, which can result in a higher cost to the state. In terms of the public, they may think that the state is getting and paying for much, much more than we actually need. That is not a good perception. So how do you transform restrictive specs? You beef up your general specs to allow for more competition while still getting what you need. You can add performance expectations or a compatibility clause. Here's an example. You have a predetermined outcome. You need to buy a car, and specifically, you want to buy a Toyota Corolla LE. You know that the Corolla specs slightly differ from other comparable cars, so you write a spec that's restrictive to make sure you get the Corolla. Bad procurement. So why do you need a Corolla? I'm not knocking the Corolla, but there are many types of comparable cars out there. There's the Ford Focus, Chevy Cruze, Nissan Sentra, etc. Some are actually more fuel efficient than the Corolla, and given today's cost of gas, can't we all consider something a little more fuel efficient? Similarly, the Corolla is a 4-speed automatic. The others are 5 or 6 speeds. So what's the harm in one or two more gear options? The Corolla also comes with some extra standard features like cruise control and driver passenger heated mirrors. Really? Do you really need cruise control and heated mirrors? Remember now, this is taxpayers' money. Okay, so we're going to take the Corolla restrictive specs, see the restrictive column, and we're going to transform them into a spec that's a little more competitive and fair. In the transformed column, you'll see how we added the word minimum. That means that offers can offer a car that has at least that or better. So you may not get the Toyota Corolla, but you will still get something that meets your requirements. Now, given specs in the transformed column, it still takes out the Sentra, who doesn't meet the minimum torque or horsepower, and it takes out the Cruise, who doesn't meet the minimum torque or fuel economy. Can you justify why you need a horsepower of at least 132 at 6,000 RPM? Why is 130 at 6,000 RPM not sufficient? And for torque, why do you need at least 128 at 4,400 RPM? Can you make do with 123 at 3,600? The best transformation column is the most competitive of the three examples above. It allows you, the agency, to be competitive so a bunch of offers can meet your requirements. So quick disclaimer, the samples above focus solely on restricted specs and would be in no way ready for release without adding more complete specs like seat capacity, spare tire availability, safety features, etc. Another type of spec is a brand name or eco spec. Don't get it mixed up with restrictive brand name specs. A brand name or eco spec identifies a brand name and model number and includes or equal. Usually, if you're going to use this type of spec, it's best to also include characteristics or features that you require so that vendors know what to offer in the event they can offer you an or equal. Here's a sample. Toilet paper. I did my research and made sure that both major manufacturers, Kimberly-Clark and Georgia-Pacific, could offer this product. Then I went ahead and listed both of their product numbers as part of my spec or equal. In addition to the product numbers, I also specced out what I was looking for in my toilet paper. Roll, 2-ply, fully bleached, sheet size of approximately 4x4. And because KC and GP packaged their cases differently, I included both their rolls and case sizes in my description. And, just as a side note, there was a big difference in the number of toilet paper sheets per case. So to keep it the most fair and competitive, you may want to have offers submit pricing by the least common denominator, which, in this case of toilet paper, would be by toilet paper sheet. I know it sounds ridiculous, but you do what you gotta do to be fair and competitive. Here are the HAR definitions of a qualified products list, or QPL. Basically, it's a list of items that have been examined, tested, and approved by the state to meet the state's requirements. The QPL list is a part of the solicitation, so any additions or changes to the products listed needs to be addressed via amendment or addendum prior to the due date for offers. If using a QPL, you have to be fair and allow for substitution requests. The pre-qualification process for substituted items must be perceived to be fair. Combo specs are the most common type of spec. It's when you combine design and performance specs or design, performance, and brand name or eco specs or some other combination. Remember though, a restrictive spec will always be a restrictive spec, and approval may be needed prior to using a restrictive spec. So quick pop quiz. A response isn't necessary on your part, but it's just to get you thinking and make sure you're still with me here. So what kind of spec is this? Retractable gel pen with black ink, 0.5 millimeter Pilot G2, and 131002. Okay, so this is actually a restrictive spec. It specifies the exact brand name, the Pilot G2, and a product number, the N131002, and does not allow for an or equal. Another topper, what kind of spec is this? Gel, retractable, refillable pen, 0.5 millimeter black ink, pilot, N131002 or equal. So this is actually both A and C. It's a combo spec. Design and brand name are equal. Let's continue. When developing specs, there are some things that should be considered. Minimum requirements, competition, and test methods, all which should provide an award at best value. Awesome sound specs use industry terminology, specifies tolerances, describes the application, and is clear, concise, and consistent. It avoids ambiguous, conflicting terms and requirements that limit competition. So what should be included in your spec? Detailed product and our performance requirements like space or weight restrictions and minimum maximum parameters. Include quantities that the intended use of the product, any required certifications or licensing. Include information regarding delivery, like when and where the item needs to be delivered. It's always good to include the necessity to walk upstairs or crouch into tiny spaces to complete delivery. Include warranty, training, insurance information. Also include what the vendor should be including in their offered price. Like, is the vendor to include freight, transportation, packaging, delivery to destination, labor, fees, materials, taxes, GET in their offered price? It may also help the offers to include a clause that states that the vendor can charge as what the vendor can charge as a separate line item. For example, GET. Does the vendor include GET in their offered price, or will they be able to add it as a separate line item to their invoice? Lastly, include any other requirements or responsibilities of the vendor. Examples are electrical hookups, removal of debris packing materials, or disposal of old equipment. Here's a sample spec for low-density polyethylene bags or trash bags. It specs out materials, destructibility, sizes, the formula used to calculate average weight of bags per case, inclusions of twist ties, and required case labeling. Here's the accompanying offer form pricing page for vendors to complete for the trash bag sample. Please note that this particular solicitation allows for two types of preferences, recycled products and Hawai'i products. Preferences will not be covered in this training, but are covered more in depth in the training for the specific method of procurement, like competitive sealed bidding. Here's some sample clauses requiring HCE compliance and the sample clause for liability insurance, since it is required for executive departments agencies. You may want to reference the Comptroller's Memorandums 2010-06, 2010-08, and 2010-39. Specs cannot discriminate against recycled materials. In fact, you can further encourage offers to offer recycled products by including a recycled product preference clause in your solicitation. As stated earlier, I'm not going into preferences, but for office paper and printed materials, the state shall, and counties are urged, to purchase office paper and printed material with recycled content. No questions asked. The state needs to purchase office paper and printed materials with recycled content. Here's a sample of a spec for office paper. Remember, for the state, agencies are required to purchase paper with recycled content. So this spec gives definitions of the different types of recycled paper and the minimum recycled material required, which in this case was 30%. Here is a sample offer form pricing page for offers to submit their pricing on for the recycled paper. This offer form page includes the specs, the type, size, color of paper in the description, and also reiterates the minimum recycled content. It also allows for a brand name or equal, so offers can offer the Boise product stated or anything equal to that. Another example, but this time when recycled products are not required, toilet paper. This spec tells the percentage required to qualify for the recycled product preference. In this case, 20% recycled was required to qualify for the preference. Here's a sample recycled product preference clause that was included in the solicitation used for toilet tissue because recycled products were not required. But because we wanted to encourage recycled products, we gave them a recycled product preference. Note again, we're not going into depth on any preferences. Preferences are covered in the training for the methods of procurement where preferences apply. Here's my toilet paper offer form pricing page. It's just a sample. Ooh, quick! Here's a quick quiz. Um, just to make sure you folks are still hanging in with me. True or false? State agencies are required to purchase recycled office paper. Well, the answer is true. State agencies are required to purchase recycled paper. The statutes and rules have requirements when speccing out motor vehicles. The purpose of this is to reduce our dependence on petroleum. When acquiring new vehicles, agencies shall use DBEDS guidelines. If you're purchasing or leasing a vehicle, recommend reviewing DBEDS guidelines on their website and HRS Section 103G 412. Anyone procuring for guard services, effective July 2013, guards need to meet certain requirements. Review HRS Section 463-10.5 in entirety and include the requirements in your solicitation. There are oh, there are some of the other statutes, these are some of the other statutes that should be considered depending on what you're writing specs for. I'm not going to go into detail, but it can be good information to know in the event that you need to procure for any of these types of things. For those agencies who procure for a company to develop or prep specs for them, the company that was awarded and paid to prep the specs cannot submit an offer on that solicitation. Remember, regardless of who's prepping the specs, specs should always seek to promote overall economy and encourage competition. All right, let's briefly cover scope of work. As stated earlier, a scope or statement of work is a description of the requirements to be performed. They are normally used when procuring for services. Because scope or statement of work is quite a mouthful, from now on I'll just refer to them as scope of work. It's just easier. So what should be included in your scope of work? Include the background, what this procurement is all about, and what your objectives are. Basically, what you're buying. Include the contractor's tasks and any deliverables, milestones, proof of performance, like findings or data reports, delivery dates, completion dates, and the responsibilities of the department, like what the state will be providing. Characteristics of a good scope of work is something that is consistent, simple, and easy to comprehend. It's something that's categorized and organized. Make sure you're clear on who's responsible for what. Some questions to consider when developing your scope of work. Who's responding? Will my scope restrict my competition? What should the offers know? How much detail should you provide? Is the scope written clearly enough to avoid confusion? What questions could vendors ask? And what exactly are you buying? Last section we'll go over today is word selection. Your choice of words is very, very important in specs. It tells the vendors what's required and what's not. When using must or shall, that's like saying the vendor has to do something, no matter what. Should or may is like saying it's not a requirement, but it would be a nice to have. For will, you can use will in cases where future performance is required, like power for the motor will be supplied by the agency. These are some samples where the choice of words greatly affect the requirements of the author or contractor. If you use shall on the first one, the contractor shall deliver bags within 10 days of receipt of order, then that's telling the vendor that they have to do it. But if you use should, that the contractor should deliver in 10 days, then they can deliver in 10 days, or 20 days, or 30 days. Granted, the contractors shouldn't do this because it's bad customer service, but still, it's good to specify in your solicitation exactly what's required of your vendors. And please be sure that what you're requiring is something that's not unreasonable. Likewise, on the second sample, offer shall or should provide references. Do you require the references or are they a nice to have? One more quick pop quiz. If you require the offer to be HCE compliant prior to award, what word should you use? Shall, may, should? The answer is shall. It's required. You're requiring it. So the offer shall be HCE compliant. When creating a text, choose words that are simple and easy to understand. No need to go all crazy and try to impress the vendors with your extensive vocabulary. Just say what you mean and be clear about it. For example, all these specs are requesting for the same thing, janitorial services, specifically to empty trash. But from the vendor's standpoint, which is the easiest to read and understand? Which one tells the vendors what you, the agency, want? The first one is pretty straightforward, right? Empty trash cans. But it doesn't tell the vendor where to put the trash or if they need to take the trash home with them or whether or not they need to change the liners. And if they do need to change the liners, who is to provide them? Them or the state? The second one is a little convoluted. All 10 all 10-gallon, 30-inch trash receptacles shall be emptied. The word shall is used so the vendor shall empty the specified trash can. But then it goes on to say at least 5 times a week at approximately 10 a.m. sharp. Does that mean that the vendor shall empty the trash in the metal container at least 5 times a week at 10? So the vendor, wanting to do a great job, collects the trash 2 times a day and leaves the trash somewhere to dump it in the metal container once a day at 10ish and approximately 10 a.m. sharp. Does that mean at exactly 10 a.m. or approximately 10 a.m.? It's confusing. The last one is good. Empty trash cans into the building's refuse bin 5 times a week. Replace liners when the existing bag is leaking, torn, or unsanitary. Contractors shall furnish all labor, equipment, and supplies necessary to perform services. This spec tells the offer what the agency needs and what the contractor is expected to do and the frequency in which to do it. It provides a clear description of what the vendor is responsible for. When using the words contractor and offer, keep in mind that both have different meanings and should be used appropriately in your solicitation. The word contractor is used when referring to requirements after the solicitation is awarded. The word offerer is used when referring to the entity that is responding to the solicitation. So when you say that HCE compliance is required prior to award, you would refer to the entity as offerer, like the offer is required to obtain HCE compliance prior to award. However, the contractor may be required to maintain compliance throughout the term of the contract. When using offer or contractor in your spec, you're going to want to specify which is responsible for what requirements and the consequences, if any. For example, if the offer is required to do something but fails to do it, what will happen? Will it delay proper execution of the contract or will it be sufficient grounds for rejection of offer? Likewise, if the contractor is required to do something but fails to do it, what happens? Will it be a breach of contract? Will it be subject to liquidated damages? Or will it be cause to terminate the contract? You may want to check with your AG on any legal issues that may come up when terminating a contract. When using terms and acronyms, use only the ones that have a specific meaning to the solicitation. Capitalize acronyms whenever they are used throughout your document, but keep the use of acronyms to a minimum. You also may find it helpful to have a terms and acronyms section in your solicitation for easy reference. Here are some samples on the overuse or underuse of terms and acronyms. The first one, the TP shall be FB 2-ply with SS APX 4x4 to fit SSD with 500 SPR, blah, 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 blah. It's totally an over-dramatization, but it definitely has too many acronyms, making it hard to read and understand. The second sample states the same thing as the first, but it doesn't use any acronyms, even though it could probably use some. The last one is a good example. It's clear and easy to read, and because this would be a solicitation put out by the State Procurement Office, the acronym SPO would likely be a commonly used acronym throughout the solicitation. And if there was a terms and acronyms section in the solicitation, that would be a bonus because it'll help for easy reference. Your writing style is also very important when writing specs. You want to have an expository style. You want to use an active voice, not a passive voice. And you want to use short words and phrases and keep a parallel structure. Expository style is used to inform, describe, or explain. It's not creative or imaginative. Pretty much, don't be Shakespeare when writing your specs. When you're formatting your sentences, make some things to keep in mind are that long sentences are generally harder to understand, but too many short sentences make it sound choppy. It's usually best to use medium-length sentences which allow space to connect ideas and add details while still being clear and easy to read. A word of caution, though, a continuation of medium-length sentences can be monotonous, so it's best to keep your average sentence length to be about 20 words. Here are some examples of active versus passive sentences. A passive sentence is like, the meetings will be held monthly by the contractor's management team, where an active sentence is like, the contractor's management team will conduct monthly meetings. Active sentences are not meant to beat around the bush. It states who's doing what, no question. So, as stated before, when you're writing your specs, keep it simple and limit the wordiness. Here's some examples of commonly used terms and how these terms can be replaced with something just a little more simple. Parallel structure is the repetition of a chosen grammatical form within a sentence. It adds clarity to your writing by creating word patterns that are easily followed. An example of non-parallel structure is, please complete the form, sign it, and then it should be included in the proposal. It's not that easy to follow, right? So an example of parallel structure for this sentence would be, complete the form, sign it, and include it in the CO proposal. It's a small change, but it makes a big difference on how easy it is to follow. Here's some extras that should be considered when writing your specs. Requirements should only be stated once. Reason being is that if, in the event, you need to do an addendum or an amendment, it's easier for you to change just one area. But if you have the requirement in multiple areas in your solicitation and you change one but not the other, you can end up with a contradictory spec. Not so good. Another area is be consistent in in your references, in your wording, in your formatting, and in your phrasing. Everything should be consistent. The last extra is to be clear on as to what's required and what's not, and of course, who's responsible for what. Specs have a great impact on the procurement process. A poorly written spec can restrict and deter potential offers and increase costs, while a well-written spec can attract many qualified offers. A poorly written spec can be protested by unsuccessful offers due to spec misinterpretation, while while a well-written spec gives sharp, specific criteria, which will hopefully minimize protests. Specs can also affect the offer's risk, the type of contract, and the administration of the contract. So, quick overview. Remember, we are using taxpayers' money, so we need to be open, transparent, and fair. Spec out what you need using the types of specs we covered today. Be clear and concise, and don't forget to include clauses for the other things that may be required, like compliance, liability insurance, and delivery requirements.